house, there was a trunk full of pictures, and it included a child that we estimate was about 5 years old, who had a wig on her head, lipstick on her face, and someone had put long fingernails on her, and she was there without a shirt on, nothing on her top, except a little skirt on the bottom. So this is a horrific crime. It's really a scourge, in my opinion, on the nation. And it happens all around us, and many times we don't recognize it and we don't know what it is, okay? In the city of Atlanta, commissioned a study called Absent in Plain View a few years ago, and it was a study that talked about how this was all around us, and we didn't see it. And Atlanta has really a very bad reputation for this. In fact, metropolitan Atlanta is one of the #1 top places for this. It has been in the past in the nation. This Wesley Chapel corridor over here, which is very close to this church, it's been a corridor where there's been some heavy trafficking of young people. So, it's important for you to understand what this is, how to recognize it when you see it, and what to do. I remember maybe it's been about 4 years ago, I was at the mall at Stonecrest, and because I've been trained to sort of be sensitive to this, I saw a young girl sitting on the floor with a cell phone on the top level of a mall. And then on the other side of the mall, I saw a man standing on the other side watching her. And I just sort of, and it's a funny thing, I had on my t-shirt that said, "End Human Sex Trafficking." I don't know why I had it on that day, but I did. But in any event, I kind of recognized what was going on, and he was on his cell phone, and she was on hers, and in my estimation, he was trying to sell her. So what I did is I contacted the police about it, and they told me to contact the mall security about it, and they went out and they checked the situation out, and then I called them back later as a follow-up to see what happened. And in fact, I think that was the best thing that I could have ever done. So I want you to be sort of keen to know that it's all around you. It affects all socioeconomic classes. There was a time when we would see young people walk in the street and you could kind of figure out what's going on. But what do you think has happened since then? Anybody? Yeah, it's on the street, but how do they, what's going on? Yeah, it's a lot of it now is online, okay? So, they've gotten smarter. They've learned how to pay, get the money online too. So, law enforcement has had to work hard to sort of keep up with what's going on. Just to let you know who some of the predators are, you're looking at people who are lawyers, judges, some doctors, as you're aware of, have been involved in this kind of thing. School teachers. I mean, you name it, okay? And there was a study that was commissioned in metropolitan Atlanta a few years ago that found that the highest percentage of sex trafficking of kids was where do you think in metro Atlanta? Possibly. Well, I'm going to speak about the airport in a minute. It wasn't the airport. Well, the cab is pretty bad. Pretty bad. That's what I said. Somebody said north side. Okay, the northern suburbs, the more affluent suburbs of Atlanta. And why do you think that's where the greatest demand is coming from? That's where the money is. They've got the money to pay for it. Correct. So, the profile of the average predator may not be exactly who a lot of people think it is. It's going to be professional, a lot of times professional men, businessmen living in great homes. They're married, and they know how to use the internet, and they know how to present themselves on the internet, and that's one way they fish people in, okay? So let me give you just a little bit of highlights on a study that was done that YouthSpark was involved in. That's in Atlanta. And this study is a few years old. It was in 2013. But what they found is 7,200 men account for 8,700 paid sex acts with adolescents, females, each month in Georgia, which comes down to about 300 a day. Okay? Only about 10% of these men are actively, openly, and directly seeking to pay for sex with a female they know to be under the age of 18. The rest end up paying for sex with an adolescent, even though they did not ask for the young person in the first place. 28,000 men pay for sex with adolescent females each year in Georgia, and nearly 10,000 of these purchase sex with adolescent females multiple times per year. So I could go on and on and on, but it is a horrific problem, and it wrecks and it ruins lives, okay? So how do we spot it? I'm going to talk a little bit about what law enforcement is doing to try to work on this problem. It's a tremendous problem. I remember when we first started looking into it, the police acted as though, and this was, remember, it's a while ago, and I've been retired when we started, but they acted as though they really didn't believe that it existed. It became an issue in Atlanta because Atlanta's reputation was a city on the move. And so nobody wanted to talk about sex trafficking of children. It was sort of like a dirty word, and these prosecutors need to go somewhere and sit down. We don't want to talk about this anymore. You know, it's not something they would want the Chamber of Commerce talking about, so we just don't want to deal with it. And so we had to educate the police. They used words for these young girls that I would not repeat in the church. And so we had to change their thinking, okay? So the girls were not themselves prostitutes. They were, in fact, victims. The men, we had to change the language, were not Johns. They were predators preying upon children. So, you know, there had to be a change of mind, a mindset change before the will came to do anything about this. And let me tell you, the church was very much involved in these efforts. In fact, some of the first rescue efforts to help these young girls began in churches in Atlanta. I belong to a church that just opened a house for young ladies who are involved in this, victimized in this way. It's called Tabitha's House. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. Tabitha's House just got a facility in Atlanta. And I'm going to give you some information before I leave if you think somebody's been involved in this. So, you know, there are 24-hour hotlines that you can call for help. But there aren't many beds online in Atlanta to help young people. Unfortunately, the legislature hasn't appropriated enough money for it. There was another house called Angela's House, which shut down for lack of funding. Anybody familiar with Angela's House? That was one of the first houses where these young people could be taken, they could be given services, they were secure, pulled away from the predators, they were provided clothing and food, education. So there's a lot of things, and therapy. There's a lot of things that they really needed. So, you know, pray for more people to get involved in these efforts to house these young people and care for them when they're involved in these kinds of activities. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about some of the agencies that are helping in a few minutes. But back to some of the stories that we saw in the district attorney's office. Again, this crossed over all kinds of lines, all kinds of socioeconomic lines. We saw people that were involved with the children in what we call master dominatrix relationships, which is really satanic relationships, where the pimp became the person's master, and dog collars were put on some of these young people, and they could not do anything without the permission of their masters. So you see, this is, to me, this is a spiritual. I looked at what I did as a ministry, and the people who worked in that unit were people who wanted to do the kind of work. Some people couldn't do it. It was too painful for them, you know. But this is a spiritual thing, okay? And the people who get drug into it, the young people, have tremendous problems and tremendous issues. There is an organization, I think, I'm going to leave you a little bit of information, called Youth Spark in Atlanta, who helps treat girls and offer them services And so they want to give you some, and I contacted them before I came, and they gave me some information that I've gotten permission to give you on some of the red flags, okay? Some of the educational red flags are kids who may not be. Now remember, they don't have to apply, but they may apply. Not on the correct grade level. In other words, kids falling behind in schools. These are things to look for. Children who are developmentally delayed or sometimes preyed upon more than others. And there's nothing new about that. Even before this became a real issue, I don't know if some of the older people in here can remember, there was people in the community that were known to be developmentally delayed or have some sort of mental impairment, and those young women sometimes were preyed upon by people in the neighborhood for sexual reasons. Well, that's still happening. Kids with behavioral issues in school. Kids who are constantly absent from school. Truants. Truancy is a major indicator of something being wrong. If you go back and you look at the histories of people who end up in prison, you're going to find that many of them, especially African Americans, were truant in school. Kids who come in tired, sleeping in class. Kids that have been expelled from school. Why? Because they're out there on the street. Anybody can pick them up. Some other family red flags. Runaways. Kids who've been thrown out by their parents. In other words, anybody with a lack of supervision, and sometimes this can be as a result of a divorce or a separation. Kids who have a history with defects. Their parents are on drugs. We had a case of a young lady, she was 12 years old, a young girl, I should say, and her brother who was 10. And their mother had a boyfriend who was supplying her with drugs, and the children were traded for the drugs. So they were in a house where they were being abused every night by mama's boyfriend. As a matter of fact, it was mama's boyfriend was so bad at one time that I think at one of the defects offices in Atlanta, they had up a sign, "Beware of mama's boyfriend," because it was that bad. But these children were taken, of course, they were taken into protective custody. The little girl had a baby. She was 12. Child was put up for adoption. But the mother and the father went to prison because of what the position, that mother and the boyfriend, went to prison because of the position the kids were placed in by what was happening to them. Sometimes kids who live in homes where there's domestic violence. Why would you think they might be vulnerable? Anybody? They're what? A way to escape. Kids, what we found when we interview kids that are involved in this, sometimes they're looking for affection. A lot of times they are, and attention. You know, there was a group of pimps that all they had to do was get their hair fixed and get their nails done, and they could tell them anything, you know. But they're looking for attention, and so when there's domestic violence sometimes in a home, children feel alienated. It makes them vulnerable to be groomed over a period of time, and some of these people take long periods of time to do this. The people who sell these kids, again, like I said a moment ago, they're not all men. They're female pimps, you know, and all kinds of things going on out there. So these are some red flags. Inappropriate dress, poor hygiene, possession of large amounts of money, children with a history of STDs and STIs, kids who have bruises and trauma, kids who may be drug addicted, and kids who have much older boyfriends and girlfriends. You know, that's another possible red flags. And, you know, I have a list of them. I'm going to leave the list here. If you want, you know, parents and children, students who want to take a look at them. We have seen opportunities for students to help other students, and they have, and they've turned them, you know, told their parents about what was going on. Parents got in touch with the school. Schools have protocols for this. They got involved, and they sort of pulled the children out. So, you know, it's good to know, you know, what some of the red flags are, what to look for, so that you can spot a child that may be in distress or in need of help. I've got some other things here I can talk about, but you know what I'd like to do is stop for a minute and take some questions, or if you have some concerns about this issue, and that might be the best way to handle it. Anybody got any questions? Yes. Yes, boys are also involved in all of this. Many times they are drug addicted, because another way of getting a child to perform sex is to inject them with drugs. And so that's what happens. They get injected with drugs many times, and so they perform in order to feed their drug habit that's been forced upon by the predator. So yes, we see boys. Generally, it's been harder with boys. A lot of times they're embarrassed to report it because they feel some kind of a way. It gives a very negative masculine image of them, that they have been taken advantage of, and so it's more difficult. We had a young man who it was very hard for us to get him to come in and even talk to us about it. And the way he got pulled in and he was victimized, he was out looking for a job. You see, it's all these kinds of, these people go where the kids are. He's out looking for a job. He wanted to become a shoe salesman and didn't realize that the person he was talking to was a predator. He offered him a beer at his house, or I guess he thought he was man enough to go there and have a beer. And he was assaulted while he was there, and it went from there further. So yes, boys are involved in it, as well as girls. The statistics show more girls than boys, but boys are pulled into it as well. So you have to be careful with your sons as well as your daughters. But yes, it's a problem for both boys and girls. Yes, sir.
If a child, or if a person in general, feel that someone is coming on to them like that, and they may continue to press them in different ways, how would you suggest that they reveal this kind of incident?
Okay.
You know,
any contact that you are uncomfortable with, the person has to stay away from you. Any type of contact that you feel is invasive, and it doesn't have to be physical, it could be verbal invasive contact, then you need to report that. First of all, I would say report it to your parents. Of course, some kids can't talk to their parents, okay? So if you can't report it to the parents, see your guidance counselor at school. They'll know what to do. But it needs to be reported. It has to be reported, because when it's not, that opens up the avenue for it to become greater, more intense, because some people just won't back off. So I would say the first step that you need to do is to report it so that you can be made safe. You can also report to the police, but young people often report to their parents. And if it's not the parent, it could be somebody else in the family, because look, let me tell you, sometimes the parents are the problem. Many of the cases that we saw involved children running away from things that were going on in the home, which included sometimes a sibling, sometimes it was a step-parent, sometimes on a rare occasion it was the mother. And so that child would have to report to another relative. You could report it to the church. Or if you have a pastor, report it at school, like I said, to the guidance counselor, report to someone. And in Georgia, there are people who are called mandated reporters, police officers, counselors, doctors. They are mandated reporters, okay? And mandated reporters are required by law to report this to DFACS and or the police. Their failure to do so is a crime. It's a misdemeanor in the state of Georgia. So, once you report it and you put it in the link, then they have protocols they have to follow in order to protect you. And again, failure for them to do so subjects them to criminal punishment. So you always report it. This is not something that you, because remember, these people operate more efficiently when you are silent, when you are quiet, when they can isolate you. Yeah, they're not going to operate in front of a crowd, when they can isolate you. So yes, report it.
Okay, you said that, especially with the internet, that times are changing. I know cryptocurrency and bitcoins are a big thing now in cybercurrency. And so what system, how difficult is it to track buyers that use cryptocurrency and bitcoins? And secondly, do you guys have a specific system to track those things?
Well, let me say something. When I was working, we didn't have, there wasn't, bitcoins were not an issue, okay? But let me say something. Anything that's traded for value, anything of value traded for sex is criminalized, okay? And remember, I talked a minute ago about drugs in exchange for sex. It's criminalized. And I don't know if you're aware, but there are going to be probably some regulations coming out about Bitcoin before long. The government is looking at the whole Bitcoin industry. But, you know, there are all kinds of ways to pay for illegal sex. That's just one other way to do it. People have used it, they've set up phony companies where they could use credit cards. So these guys are sophisticated. They've had, you know, so law enforcement now has got these trackers where they can track them. In fact, in the GBI, sometimes they have units which will go out and they will fish online looking. And they set up websites where, you know, people are invited to come in. And if they come in to the website seeking children, they can look at them, they know where they are, and they can make an arrest, okay? So, yeah, you know, Bitcoin, any kind of method of exchanging value in exchange for sex, it's illegal. It's illegal.
Okay, I just wanted to mention that it's not only children, of course, we all know it's women and men, young men. And we really need to be cautious of our surroundings.
Yes.
Because especially like at the gas station when pumping gas, like if a stranger comes up to you
right.
and want to talk to you, like for example, this lady said that she was pumping gas and someone came up to her and said he was a painter and asked if she needed to get her house painted, and then she said, not at this time. And he said, well, let me leave my business card with you. And he gave her the card, and she accepted it and put it in the car. And then when she finished pumping her gas, she got in the car, rolled the window up, and started her car, and then realized that she was getting very dizzy and noticed the car. The man that gave her the card got in a truck that someone else was driving and was following her, and she was getting very dizzy. And this is a way of them abducting you, and you're not even aware of what's going on around you. It's like they have all kinds of schemes of getting their victims. So we really have to be careful.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I don't know if you're aware, but the law requires that certain types of businesses post a notice in the restroom giving you, and see, this is the thing. I don't know who's enforcing this because it's not always enforced, but gas stations, hotels, places like that are supposed to have notices posted in the restrooms. So if, in fact, you believe that you are about to become a victim or have become a victim of sex trafficking, there's an 800 number for you to call so that you can get help. Now, the problem is that a lot of businesses are not doing that. But yes, things happen at gas stations. They happen at hotels. They happen on playgrounds. Women are often drugged. They're drugged. And this, there are all, yeah. There are all kinds of ways of drugging people. And I'm not trying to scare you. I hope I'm not doing that. I'm just trying to make you aware that, you know, the devil is busy. And so the church has to be vigilant. You know, the saints have to be vigilant, you know, wise as serpents but gentle as doves. You have to know what's going on. So yes, there are all kinds of ways. And let me just say this, please, please, young people, never let somebody, I'm glad you said that, prepare a drink. I mean, even, I'm talking about Cokes, nothing for you, and set it aside somewhere and then give it to you, okay? There are all kinds of things that are put in drinks, you know, and so if it's not in a drink with alcohol in it, if someone wants to get you, they'll put it in a non-alcoholic beverage. And some of these drugs, they paralyze. I'm sure you're aware of that. You're unable to fight, and you're in a bad position when you get there. I know someone, I have a relative that was in college, and someone put something in a drink she had. So I'm just simply telling you, you got to be vigilant. You can't do that. That's another way that they do this.
Did you say that law enforcement officers have trackers where they can see, say if a child's abducted, they can see where that child is?
What they have is they have a demand tracker that they use in the state of Georgia, trying to, this is the GBI, they're trying to assess demand, okay? And so this tracker is, it's a web application that they use, online, so that they can set up sort of a point of sale place online for people who are looking for this to come to. And that's how they get them. That's how they track them. That's just one more tool in an arsenal of tools that is being used by law enforcement to try to curb this problem in the state of Georgia.
Also, if you assess someone being abducted, what more can you do aside from, to bring immediate help to the victim? What more can you do aside from calling the police?
The best thing you can do is call the police. I mean, that's the first thing you should do. Let me just say something. I would never recommend, because unless the people, now let me just say this. If you saw your own kid out somewhere and somebody's about to harm them, you're going to do what you have to do, okay? Don't get me wrong about that. But the thing that should be done when you believe somebody is, as I did, okay? I'm a woman. I'm not going to go over and accost somebody that I believe is a trafficker. I'm, by myself, 68 years old. I'm not doing that, and I don't recommend you to do that. The best thing to do is call the law enforcement officials for them to come in. And sometimes, and this is what we did, good law enforcement operations, people are proactive. You talked about kidnapping. Prosecutors can charge a lot of things. If the person is about to do whatever it is and hasn't done it, there are certain other types of crimes that might be charged that might be helpful to the victim. Kidnapping in and of itself is a crime. False imprisonment is a crime. You follow what I'm saying? So you call law enforcement, and they sort of deal with it. There's a whole slew of crimes that are sex offenses in the state of Georgia. But smart, proactive law enforcement people will charge whatever the facts will support, okay? So I advise you, especially in a kidnapping or something like that, unless somebody's trying to snatch, your own, you get them out of harm's way. But other than that, I would say call law enforcement for something like that. There were a couple of ladies who were very zealous about trying to help young people, and they wanted to set up a street outreach to them and pull them in off the street. Now, there are organizations that do that effectively, but these ladies had not been trained to do it, and they ended up getting arrested themselves, okay, because they didn't know how far to go, what was over the line, and they didn't know what to look for. They meant well, but they didn't have the proper training for what they were doing, okay? So my advice would be to call law enforcement. Better be safe than what? Call law enforcement and let them handle it.
I was in London couple weeks ago, and I met a lady who, and I want to bring out another side to it where it becomes a cycle. Her mom pimped her, and she had a child, and the mom left from London to live here in the U.S. And she, because she thinks she was too young, she gave the mom the child, her child. And she hasn't seen this child for years. And then she came here to meet her daughter, and her daughter hated her. And she couldn't understand why the daughter hated her, so she went into therapy with her. And to realize that the mother pimped her, the granddaughter. Yes, because remember now, the mother had pimped the daughter. And the daughter had a child and now give that child to the mother.
Second generation pimping, is that what you're saying?
And the funniest thing, that child now has a child and give the child to someone else. And it's like, where does this cycle end?
Well, that sometimes is a problem.
It is.
It's got to be dealt with properly. Somebody has got to take responsibility for reporting. Let's go back to the first child. Someone has to take responsibility for reporting what that grandmother did to her own child. Got to take that responsibility. And sometimes that's difficult. In fact, the most difficult situations I've found is sex exploitation within a family. Because relatives don't want to see other relatives go to what? Jail. And so what they do is they tend to harbor this, and they hide it within the family. It becomes a beast and a monster. So the best way to break it is when it first surfaces, okay? That's when somebody in the family has to have the courage to step forward and do something. You know, we've had to try cases where the family totally would not cooperate with us. So we took on the responsibility of doing what we knew they could not do or would not do, because they didn't want to turn on their own brother, their own uncle, their own mother, even though they knew what was going on inside the family. So we had to take the responsibility of stepping in and stepping in the gap for the child, okay? But the best way to break that is, because it can become a cycle, is that as soon as it surfaces, you do something about it. There is a boxer living in Metro Atlanta who you all are all familiar with. His brother was charged in Atlanta with sexually exploiting his grandchildren. Turns out that he also sexually exploited his own daughters. And they didn't do anything about it. They kept it quiet. It was an embarrassment. But when he did it to their children, then they stepped forward, okay, and reported him. And so Granddad couldn't do that anymore. He went to jail. So, you know, it's a very hard, the family dynamic can be very complex. It's very hard, and that's why I'm saying to young people, seek help. You know, many times remember, most exploitation is not of the commercial type that we're talking about today. Most of it takes place between people who know each other. It's not the person that's going to drag you off down a ditch somewhere and do something. That's rare. It's going to be somebody who you know and you have some sort of relationship with. That's most of what you see. The emphasis right now is on trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation. But by far, most of it takes place between people who know. It could be friends, it could be relatives, it could be associates, it could be business associates. Most of it takes place that way.
I just want to add to that, Debbie. And what really got me going with this is that one of the state representatives mentioned that at the beginning of the month, some of the mothers send their daughters out to prostitute to pay for the rent.
Yeah. Deborah.
Here's a question right here.
Some of the mothers who cannot pay their rent send their daughters out to be prostituted to get money to pay the rent.
They do it for money. They do it for drugs. Children are exploited terribly. It's really a shame, the things that they go through. And the sad part about it is they are voiceless unless somebody else steps forward and becomes a voice for them. And it might be a friend. It could be another child. And that's why I say be vigilant, young people, about your friends and what they're going through and how they look. You know, there are kids in school that are homeless, and you may not know it by looking at them. You know, I know of a case of a young girl at a school right here in DeKalb County. She's homeless. She had a child. Her mother put her out. She was sleeping in a flop house, and people were having sex with her just so she could come out of the rain and have some place to stay. It's a pitiful situation. The guidance counselors at the school, when she finally reached out to them, were able to get her out of the situation, get her some help. They referred her on and got her some help. But you got to speak out. You have to speak out about what you see.
Deborah, I was going to ask you, can you talk to the youth about how, you mentioned friends, but how the predators will use like really, really close friends. They'll pay them like maybe $20 or $25 to lure them just around the corner of a school or around the corner of maybe the mall, and on the other side is maybe a van or someone waiting, and this is their friend.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, talk about how they use Snapchat and Instagram and all of those social media sites that kids like to lure them as well.
Yeah, social media is really big, but let me start off with the first thing that you mentioned, April. Children are often used as lures to bring kids into sex trafficking. Any of you all ever seen that? Yeah, they can be used, young people can be used as lures. We had a case once where a young girl was victimized herself, and we were trying to work on her case, and then, you know, we try to separate victims when they come into the office. But on this particular occasion, she moved toward another young lady who was there for help, and we didn't realize at first what she was doing. But we finally realized she was trying to recruit her for her pimp. There's another case I'm just going to bring. These are just anecdotal cases, but this happens often. We had another case, a young man who actually grew up in this community right up the street in Rainbow Estates. I used to live up there, so I knew who he was. And he was not very tall and had a very youthful appearance, but he was a man. And he was used to develop dating relationships with teenage girls who thought he was also a teenager. And he would date those girls, and then he would lure them in, and they would be trapped. Because the pimps, once they got you, you know, it's kind of difficult, especially if you're a young person and you don't know what to do. The girls were put in cages. Food was withheld from them unless they performed. They were threatened. Of course, you know, it's typical to threaten your family. You know, that's a typical thing they throw out. I'm going to kill your mama, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And they were also threatened with being trunked. Trunking is a process by which if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to put you in the trunk of my car and drive you to L.A. And I'm going to put you on the streets out there where there's another pimp that I know, and you're going to work for him. So, yeah, children are used as lures. People who have childlike appearances can be used as lures. And they pull young people in, and once they're in, you know, there are all kinds of things that happen to them. They're beaten. You know, like I said, food is withheld from them. Sometimes they're drug addicted. All kinds of things happen to them. And remember, nobody ever really wants this. You know, all this talk about, well, they wanted it. You know, we had to re-educate the police. No, they didn't want it. This came to them. This came to them. They didn't go to it.
Deborah, while you're on that topic, also can you speak to the young people about plants being put into schools to recruit for human trafficking?
Well, again, it's just like drugs. Um, what I just spoke about a minute ago, children are sometimes used as lures. They're there. Sometimes they're actively involved in sex trafficking themselves. Sometimes they're paid to do it. But yeah, that happens as well. I also want to go back to what you were talking about, April, about being online. You know, parents, you pay the bills for your children's cell phones. Who pays the bills? You pay them. So be vigilant about what they're doing on a cell phone. There are a number of sites out there where the kids can get really messed up in. And many times there are advertisements. You know, you need a job. You want a model. You want to do this and you want to do that. People go onto those sites and they get hooked into commercial sexual exploitation. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Craigslist. Most of you probably already heard about Craigslist because it's, you know, it got a lot of press at one time, and there's been some attention placed on Craigslist to try to curb what was going on there. But of course, you've also probably heard about Backpage, another place where a lot of this is going on. There's a site called My Red Book, City Vive.
What Backpage? What is Backpage?
Backpage is a site where people are recruited to get involved in commercial sexual exploitation. There are a number of sites out there, and some of them are relatively new. You know, I wouldn't know all of them, but they're there. And so you really have to be vigilant about what your kids look at, even Facebook. You know, somebody wanting to be your friend on Facebook. Well, who is this person? You know, who is it? You know, and Facebook can get you into trouble also. So you need to be aware of that. You know, you on Facebook, mom and dad's at work, and if you're not careful, somebody's going to be walking in the door, you know, and then you're in trouble. I think I saw this young lady over here first. Stanley, go ahead.
Deborah, I wanted to bring up the point about Donald Trump first and the Catholic Church second. During the primaries in 2016, the last election we had, that put Donald Trump in office, we had 16 females that come out and say they were molested in public by Donald Trump. He indicated that he would take them to court because of defamation of his character. He never did. Just dropped it. Right there is your answer about the truth about these females who accused him of that. And the Catholic Church, the diocese in Pennsylvania, there are 2 or 3 dioceses in Pennsylvania involving 300 priests and 4,000 victims inside the Catholic Church.
Okay.
If you're talking about the church itself and the President of the United States itself, you can imagine where we can take this.
Okay, you want me to respond?
Yeah.
Okay. The Catholic Church is not the only denomination where that has been a problem. I think there's been a lot more emphasis on Catholics because of the tendency to relocate priests. There was a priest in DeKalb County, and this was probably before a lot of you all were born, but I remember it, and he was accused of molestation of children. This is what you have to remember. In order to molest children, you have to have contact with them. So molesters generally put themselves in places where they can have contact with children. There have been youth pastors in other denominations who have been likewise accused of this kind of conduct. And I think the real issue has been for Catholics, if I may speak, it's been the tendency not to turn in the priest. You know, that's been the real rub. It's not like it didn't happen anyplace else. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? You know, children look to you for security. You are representing the church, so you represent God. You know, and it's all of that, and I'm not Catholic. I have a sister-in-law that is. But they are wrestling with all of that now because the people who did it, many of them are old, have died, and they were never brought to justice. And that left an open wound for a lot of people in the church. And so I would say pray for the church that it would do what it should do. And, you know, deal with this. I don't know of any scripture, and I'm not a minister, that would sanction anything like that. In fact, I can call in my mind a number of scriptures that say the exact opposite. So, but yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult for children. It's difficult for them to know who they can trust. If you can't trust your priest, you can't trust your pastor, you can't trust your deacons, who can you trust? These are people you go to for help. So that is an issue that needs to be dealt with inside the church, and public officials are supposed to set an example. And that goes all the way to the president. And I'm going to leave it alone with that. Yes, this lady, young lady, did she have a question? Okay.
I have two questions, actually. Sorry. A while ago, someone asked, you know, what more can you do if you've seen someone being kidnapped? So, and you said to call the police. So if
Yes.
someone's feeling a little bit more heroic and probably got a hold of a predator, and it was like some firearm combat or physical combat, and the predator was abused, what does Georgia law states about third-person defense? Because
Okay. Okay, I think I got it. The law, you have a right to defend yourself, and you have a right to defend others. All right? So the laws don't penalize people for being do-gooders. You just have to be careful. What I said was a safety question. You know, if you see somebody being pulled into a car, try your best to get the tag number and a description of the person and the vehicle, and immediately call the police, get the direction that they're going in. But yes, there are some times when somebody is right in front of your face and somebody chooses to intervene. A good faith effort to intervene, and in the process, if the attacker gets injured, there's a defense to that. And most of the time, people aren't even charged, but there's a defense to it. So no, the law protects people. It protects you for defending yourself and for defending others.
Okay, my second question. A lot of victims, especially younger ones, if they know the predator, they often point hands at someone else not to get in trouble, whether it's like their uncle and what's not.
Right.
So sometimes to actually fish that person out to confess, thinking that they were in fact the abuser, their image then gets scarred and their reputation damaged. What legal actions can they take against whether the county, federal, state, or against the victim to, you know, basically fix the reputation?
Okay. There are a couple of things in that question. Let me see if I hope I understand it correctly. The hardest cases that we saw involved teenagers, not little children, okay? And what we did is we sent them to a child advocacy center where they would have what's called a forensic interview. You go there, and then there's a person who's trained to interview you about what happened, okay? What we found for the most part is that when young children went in and were interviewed, and they used anatomically correct dolls and all kinds of other things to get the children to tell what happened to them, we were on pretty sound ground. It became trickier with teenagers, okay? And so we relied on those interviews, and the interviewers often would tell us some of the problems that they would see with some teenagers' statements. Teenagers, for the most part, want to please their parents. Okay? I'd say that's for the most part. And so sometimes in order to do that, what we found is the teenagers somewhat bent their stories. And the way prosecutors handle that is they take not just what one person says, but all of the evidence that they have before them, and then the prosecutor also interviews the teenager. I will have to tell you that we had to dismiss a case involving a teenager because the parents were pushing the teenager. And in this case, fortunately for us, we had DNA evidence. And the DNA evidence did not point to the person the teenager fingered. Okay? So that's just part of doing the job. You know, it's not perfect, but that's part of doing the job. What we did is we were careful not to file an indictment. You're talking about reputation, until we felt fairly certain that we had enough evidence to prove that the person was guilty. And that might include the person's statement, any videotapes. If they went to a public establishment, you know, we studied the videotapes and what was going on. If it was at hotels have videos everywhere, in the parking lot, and hallways, everywhere. Okay, every place except in the room. All right, so you study everything that you have. You talk to other witnesses and whatever, and then you make a decision. An indictment is an infamous thing, and you shouldn't indict unless you feel that you need to. But prosecutors have immunity if they can show they were doing their jobs in good faith. So you're not likely to get much money out of the prosecutor's office if they make a mistake. Okay.
Here.
So why do children spend so much time on Facebook than on like reading the Bible? Like, why do children like 6 years old or under spend so much time on their video games, entertainment, electronics, and all that type of stuff and their parents are just watching TV and not even reminding their children that they're supposed to come off their tablets. So why is that happening in the world today?
Okay, that's a good question. That's an excellent question. And I don't know if you all have any comments on it. I'm sure you might have some as well. I think, for the most part, children emulate what they see. And so, you know, I heard something recently that was said that kids spend a lot of time on their phones because their parents spend a lot of time also on theirs. And the children are watching what other children do and connecting with them, and they're watching what their parents do. And if the parents aren't spending much time reading the Bible or trying to help the young people understand the scriptures, then the children are not going to do it. When I was coming up, until I was able to read the Bible for myself, my mother read us the Bible. She taught us how to read and gave us Bibles and and then we were able, you know, after she explained, after so many years of explanation, she put us on our own. And then we learned how to read the Bible for ourselves as teenagers and began to try to decipher what was there and try to understand and pray and go to church. But I would say the answer to that question is that's a parental issue. You know, parents have the ability to take the computer, the phone, and all of these devices away after a certain period of time. So that's something for the parents to take care of, in my opinion. I don't know if somebody else may have another opinion.
I was just going to say, make a point about the social media stuff too. It is really important to like monitor your children while they're on social media, because I know like even with my Facebook, almost every day, like it's like an inbox of somebody like wanting to be your friend, like somebody you don't even know. That's like, yeah.
I just wanted to bring attention to one thing. I'm on Facebook too, and I've seen other people post pictures of it, but I don't know if this has happened to anybody else, but random numbers would send a message to your phone saying somebody complimented you. And then it'll be an iOS link if you have Apple and an Android link if you have an Android. And I don't know how true it is, but I heard that if you click on one of those links, that it's a way for a predator or someone who's looking to, you know, traffic humans to like track your location. I don't know how true that is. All I know is if you do get that message, don't click on the link, just, you know, don't click on the thread, just delete it. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, let me say something. You have to be careful with your phones. Phones can get you into trouble. Phones have GPS systems in them, okay? And even if we're not talking about sex trafficking, but you can be tracked with your phone. I know of a case involving a murder where a man was dating a woman and she decided she didn't want to see him anymore. The relationship was so bad she left the state and went to California. Well, she had a GPS tracker. He found her. So I'm saying you need to be careful about your phones. And if you don't know what's going on with these links, don't hit them. You know, you may not know this, but law enforcement can hear you talking in a car without you actually using your phone if your phone is on. If they're working on a case, a serious case, they can go get a court order that will allow them to hear what's going on in a car where your phone is sitting. You don't have to be talking to anybody. All you have to do is have the phone on. And they can listen to everything that's going on. That's how they solve crimes. So your phone, my point is this, your phone is a window. You know, when I was growing up, people used to talk about Big Brother. I don't know if anybody over there in here remembers, oh, Big Brother's watching you. Well, Big Brother's here. I mean, he's here. So, yeah, I mean, you don't have any privacy anymore. You know, you got drones in the sky. You know, you got phones, you got computers, and there are programs on computers and cameras on them where people can see you. So you need to be careful about it, you know, who you're dealing with. It's unfortunate, but that's the time that we live in, and you have to be vigilant.
Okay. I just wanted to mention a lot of times it's not just the parents' problem. It's the school system as well, because I have grandchildren now. My children are grown, praise God. But my grandchildren, they have to have computers and tablets because their homework is they have to do it on the computer, unfortunately. And the school actually supplies them with a tablet.
Right.
And they request that you get internet in your home. It's required now. So it's very difficult for the parents to monitor all that. And like when my children was growing up, I really didn't want to bring this up, but the church that I was in, I'm not going to mention the name of the church, of course, you know, because, you know, it's a Seventh-day Adventist church, so it's not just a Catholic church. My daughter was a victim of a predator. She was in the Big Sister program. I put her in the Big Sister program, and it was a nurse was her big sister. But lo and behold, I did not know that she was going to my daughter's high school, signing her out during the day and taking her places. I had no knowledge. And when I found out, of course, I did notify the police, and we had to go to court. And I really felt bad for this person, this young lady, because she was in the church, and I loved her. I loved my brothers and sisters in Christ, but I had to do what I had to do. And, you know, she had to pay for the medical bills. My daughter had to go for counseling and everything. And it's sad. So it's not just the Catholic Church. It's the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well. You have to really watch your children and notice their reactions and always find out what they're doing. And if I mean, lo and behold, to go to her school without me knowing, but because of the fact she was a nurse and her white and everything, they allowed her to check her out. The school's responsible as well.
Yes. Well, let me just say, I'm going to respond to that to finish up. Yes, we've seen that before too.